board of directors of the African Development Bank over the weekend approved a $288.5 million loan to Nigeria to address the COVID-19 pandemic and mitigate its impacts on the economy. The loan approval comes just about 24 hours after the multilateral institution approved Nigeria's new 5-year strategy paper, the results of the participatory consultations with a range of key stakeholders drawn from state and non-state levels. We're now being joined by the AfDB Senior Director for Nigeria Country Department, Mr. Ebrima Faal, for some insight into these key developments. Good morning and thank you for joining us on the program. But just before the AfDB announced the approval of the $288.5 billion for Nigeria, the bank also approved the new 5-year country strategy paper for Nigeria. Was that some sort of corollary to the approval for the fund?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. Yeah, the country strategy paper is a document that basically positions our engagement with the governments that we serve. And the one for Nigeria was ending last year, in fact. And we had planned to roll out a new one, and it's just sheer coincidence that the timing of the approval and the approval of the strategy document and the loan are coincident. But essentially, the strategy lays out the framework on how we're going to engage in various environmental development and certainly the need for support social inclusion through agribusiness and, of course, skills development.
Now, the new strategy paper is built on 2 pillars of infrastructure development and social inclusion. Now, talk us through the significance of these priorities.
Well, these are priorities that the government have prioritized both in the ERGP, but also in the 10 priorities of the second government of the Buhari administration. So we see these as pillars that, if appropriately implemented, will lead to massive productivity gains and be able to help support economic growth and lower, of course, poverty rates and inequality. The first pillar, infrastructure development, will focus on promoting, especially working with the government and the private sector to promote energy, the energy sector, of course, road transport and rail transport, and of course, other forms of transportation. We also look to invest quite a bit in water and sanitation services. That's for the first pillar. And the second pillar will focus around agriculture and agro-based processing. And there we'll focus a lot on skills development and trying to develop entrepreneurship programs that will create jobs and, again, be able to make our interventions more inclusive.
How would the bank join forces with the Nigerian government to implement these priorities?
Well, of course, the process of preparing the strategy is very consultative. Our primary stakeholder, of course, is the government. So we've met and discussed with all the ministries, with many of the states, and of course the private sector. So in implementing these programs, of course, we are partnering with the government, and through project implementation units, and of course through the government's own implementation ministries and the states as well. So it is a partnership, and that's premised on a lot of work in the knowledge front, but also a lot of dialogue with the government. And we do have monitoring and evaluation systems that will also inform us on how we are progressing with this.
But what for you were some of the successes and drags of the previous strategy paper 2013 to 2019, and what does the AfDB expect of the new blueprint?
That's a good question. In the last strategy, we were able to invest, I think, close to $4.5 billion to support the Nigerian development process in various areas. We supported energy generation and transmission, several water and sanitation projects, of course, agriculture projects, and of course, roads infrastructure as well. On the human capital side, a lot of activities around helping to develop skills and gender programs. So it was a very comprehensive and very far-reaching program. We are looking to, in this new country strategy, we're also looking to invest, just on average between $800 to $1 billion annually, which means that by the end of the program, we will invest about another $5 billion in the Nigerian economy. Our current active portfolio is actually that size, and it's changing. It's a dynamic thing, but roughly our average active portfolio in Nigeria, in all the sectors I just mentioned, total about $5 billion as well. So we're quite excited about this. We also would like to partner and are partnering with other development partners like the World Bank and others to make sure that our interventions are at the right scale and are reaching the right people. So all of this, I think we're quite excited with the opportunity to be able to contribute to this process.
Mr. Faal, tell us, what are the terms and conditions tied to the just approved $288.5 million fund to Nigeria?
Yeah, this is, as you know, the fund is a timely response to the COVID-19 pandemic, where we're trying to support the government to strengthen the health systems, but also to respond quickly to testing needs and other isolation centers, etc. The terms of the loans are quite concessionary. It's a long-term loan of up to 25 years. And the rates are based on LIBOR plus just 0.8 basis points. So you're looking at very low interest rates and very long tenure for this loan.
So when is the bank looking to disburse this fund to Nigeria?
We anticipate that we should be able to disburse this funds by the end of the month or early in July.
Well, Nigeria had some running facilities with the bank. What happens to the loan servicing now?
Well, we think if you look at Nigeria's debt situation, I think it is exaggerated sometimes. I don't think that we actually don't believe that Nigeria has a debt crisis in its hand. I think what we have seen is that there's an issue with debt servicing, definitely, because a large part of revenues is going to service debt. But if you look at most of that debt is domestic debt. Domestic debt, it's not international. So whereas Nigeria would have been forced, probably, if it had access to go to international markets to borrow at very non-concessional rates. The loans provided by not only us, but the IMF, and also I anticipate that the World Bank will be providing some loans. These are very low interest loans that will allow the government to recover from this crisis, while not necessarily making it very difficult to service the debt by borrowing in international markets.
You mentioned now that the loan is consensual, but I'm sure many would like to know what the timeline is for servicing it.
Yeah, I think this particular loan, like I mentioned, the tenure is 25 years. That's a very, very, very long-term loan.
So the AfDB actually expects this facility to help cushion the effects of COVID-19 on the economy, just like you rightly mentioned now. But are there any key areas that you expect the funds to be channeled to particularly?
Well, we have worked very closely with the government in the areas that they prioritize. And I think testing is one area that the government has prioritized, and I think in line with WHO guidelines. So testing is one area. I think the ability to also support the private sector to be able to manufacture testing kits and other paraphernalia that are needed for this pandemic also would be very important. We also look to see if we can support local manufacturing in those areas. The third area would be to try to see how we can also help vulnerable groups by cushioning some of the impact of this pandemic and the economic fallout from the pandemic in some of these more vulnerable groups.
Are there any monitoring mechanisms that the bank has put in place to track the use of the fund?
Well, the government has systems in place, and we try to, of course, depend on government's country systems. We are very much pleased and encouraged by the systems that the government have put in place, including the open treasury accounts, the monitoring mechanisms through the Auditor General's office. And of course, we work very closely with the implementation units to make sure that projects are being implemented so that we can get the results, intended results that we want from it.
We would like to thank you, AfDB Senior Director for Nigeria Country Department, Ms. Ebrima Faal, for speaking with us on Business Morning.
Thank you very much for having me.